The sky turned dark. It wasn't a storm or eclipse. This was something far more terrifying. Across the world, people stared up in disbelief as a massive armada of alien ships emerged from the depths of space, descending rapidly toward Earth. Towering warships, each the size of a city, blotted out the sun. Their shapes were unlike anything humans had ever seen, sleek, angular, and pulsating with energy. The first human reaction was a sense of awe. That quickly turned to panic as the full scope of the invasion became apparent. The Zorvans had arrived. Governments scrambled to respond, issuing emergency broadcasts, deploying military forces, and preparing for a conflict the likes of which no one could have ever imagined. But all the weapons of mankind, from nuclear warheads to experimental space fleets, seemed utterly insignificant compared to the sheer scale of the Zorvan Armada. It wasn't just an invasion. It was an extinction event waiting to happen. Humanity had no chance to fight back. The first transmission from the Zorvans came just hours after their arrival. A deep mechanical voice echoed across every frequency, filling every communication channel on Earth. The message was brief, cold, and final. "We are the Zorvans. Your world now belongs to us. Resistance is futile. Prepare to serve or perish." Every major city, every military command center, every household across the globe heard those words. Panic set in as humanity realized the true nature of the threat. The Zorvans weren't here to negotiate. They were here to conquer. And they were equipped with technology so advanced that Earth's defense systems stood no chance. In major cities, people flooded the streets, unsure of what to do. Some tried to flee, others tried to fight, but the Zorvan ships hovered ominously above them, emitting pulses of energy that seemed to paralyze entire regions. Military forces were mobilized, but their weapons simply bounced off the Zorvan ships' impenetrable shields. No missiles, no bombs, no defenses of any kind could touch them. As the world's leaders met in crisis summits, scientists worked desperately to understand the enemy's technology. But nothing they tried seemed to give them an edge. All attempts at communication with the Zorvans were met with silence. This wasn't a war. It was an execution. The planet was on the brink of collapse. There was no time left for diplomacy, no time left for strategy. Earth's survival depended on something extraordinary, something humanity hadn't yet realized. The answer might not lie in armies or machines. It might lie in one person. And as the Armada loomed overhead, casting its shadow across the Earth, a single voice broke through the radio static, offering a whisper of hope. There is one way we might still have a chance. One man. We send him. The world fell silent. Humanity had just placed its hopes in a single soldier, a man who would face the Zorvans alone. There was no plan, no backup, no second chance. This man's mission was simple: stop the invasion, or die trying. The world held its breath. As the days passed and Earth remained under the shadow of the Zorvan fleet, the mood across the planet shifted from panic to resignation. Cities burned as people tried to flee, while military forces were dismantled in minutes by the sheer firepower of the alien ships. Nations began to crumble under the pressure, unable to stop the overwhelming might of the invaders. The thought of resistance seemed hopeless. But in the darkest hour, a voice emerged from the chaos, a voice that would become humanity's last hope. Captain Alex Hayes was not a hero. He wasn't a leader of armies or a renowned strategist. He was simply a soldier, one of millions who had spent years fighting in small-scale conflicts across the globe. But when the call came, Hayes was different. He didn't hesitate. While the world looked to its leaders and military command for answers, Hayes had no delusions. The Zorvans were too powerful for conventional forces to stop, and their methods too ruthless to allow any human army a chance to retaliate. This was not a battle for armies or nations. It was a battle for survival, and it needed a new kind of weapon. Hayes was selected for the most dangerous mission humanity had ever conceived: infiltrate the Zorvan fleet and sabotage it from within. No one expected him to survive, but if there was even a sliver of hope, It was tied to the success of this single man. The mission was simple in its objective: destroy the Zorvan command ship, disable their weaponry, and find a way to stop the invasion. But the odds of success were infinitesimal. The Zorvans were ruthless, technologically superior, and their fleet was too massive for any single soldier to fight alone. No backup would come. There was no second chance. Alex Hayes was briefed on the mission by a small group of military and scientific minds who had worked day and night, trying to find a way to penetrate the Zorvan defenses. Their plan was to send Hayes deep into the heart of the enemy fleet, using a stealth ship designed to avoid detection long enough for him to board one of their massive warships. Once inside, he would be on his own. There was no plan for extraction, no support. The best they could offer him were experimental weapons and armor, advanced but untested. Before he boarded the ship, Hayes took a moment to reflect. He wasn't afraid. He didn't have time for fear. What terrified him wasn't the alien ships or the technology. What terrified him was the thought of failure. What if he couldn't stop them? What if he couldn't save Earth? His family, his friends, his home. All of it would be gone if he didn't succeed. With that, he made his decision. Hayes climbed into the cockpit of the prototype ship, his heart pounding with the weight of the world on his shoulders. The countdown began, and as the engines roared to life, he cast one last glance at Earth, a pale blue dot slowly shrinking in the distance. It was the last time he would see it, he knew. If he failed, it would be the last time anyone would. The ship shot off into the blackness of space, the Earth disappearing from view as Hayes steeled himself for the impossible task ahead. He knew that humanity's survival now rested on his shoulders, and that, in the end, it might come down to just one man. Captain Alex Hayes had never felt isolation like this before. As he soared through the vastness of space, alone in the cockpit of his experimental stealth ship, Earth seemed so distant. The planet that had once felt so alive and bustling now felt small and fragile, a pale blue dot slowly fading behind him. The weight of his mission pressed on his chest, heavier than any armor he wore. He had a single goal: to infiltrate the Zorvan Armada, destroy their weapon, and cripple their invasion. But the closer he got to the fleet, the more the odds stacked against him. Hayes was well aware of the Zorvans' technological superiority. Their warships, massive beyond belief, were equipped with energy shields that could repel any human weapon, and their advanced sensors could detect the slightest anomaly. The Zorvans would know he was coming. The mission was never meant to be a stealth operation. It was a suicide mission. As he approached the edge of the fleet, Hayes could feel the tension in the air, even through the isolation of his ship. The Armada stretched out before him like an endless sea of metal, some ships larger than entire cities, others seemingly floating in a near-perfect formation. The Zorvans were meticulous, calculating. They had mastered the art of war on a galactic scale. They didn't leave anything to chance. His only hope was to slip past their defenses undetected long enough to board one of the warships. The stealth technology of his ship was experimental, designed to evade detection, but Hayes knew better than to count on anything but his instincts. His heart raced as he activated the cloaking system, watching the edge of his ship flicker out of view. Every system on his ship hummed quietly, almost in protest, as if aware of the sheer impossible nature of the task. Hayes held his breath, focusing on the navigation screens, every alert and light flashing in a pattern that screamed danger. The Zorvans' fleet was more than just a military presence. It was a living, breathing organism. Everything coordinated, everything connected. If even one part of their system noticed his ship, it would be the end of him. Minutes felt like hours as he weaved through the outer perimeter of the Armada, staying close to the dark side of the larger ships, using their sheer size to shield him from detection. Every time he had to make a small course adjustment, his stomach twisted. The slightest miscalculation would trigger an alarm, and the Zorvans would descend on him like a swarm of predators. Then it happened. A flicker on his sensor array. An anomaly. One of the smaller scout ships had detected something. Hayes' breath caught in his throat as he immediately engaged the evasive protocol, hitting the thrusters with everything he had. The scout ship was fast, too fast, and it was closing in on his position. Hayes cursed under his breath. His ship was designed to be invisible, but Zorvan technology was different. Their ships had sensors that could detect even the smallest energy signatures. He couldn't outrun it. The only chance he had was to hide. He dove into the shadow of a massive Zorvan warship, hugging its hull as closely as possible. His ship's cloaking system flickered, struggling to keep up with the Zorvan sensor grid. His hands gripped the controls as his pulse raced. For a moment, everything was silent. The scout ship passed by, scanning the space he had just vacated, but it didn't seem to notice his stealth ship, now completely hidden. The seconds stretched on as the scout ship continued its patrol, unaware of how close it had come to discovering him. When the ship finally drifted away, Hayes exhaled slowly, his hands trembling slightly. He had made it past the first line of defense, but the hardest part was still ahead. He had reached the Zorvan warship. Now he had to get inside. Hayes' heart pounded in his chest as he guided his ship into the belly of the Zorvan warship, careful not to make a sound. The inner systems of the Zorvan vessel were like a labyrinth, unfamiliar, alien, and complicated. He wasn't just infiltrating an enemy ship. He was diving into the heart of their empire, a place where every step could mean his death. As he maneuvered into a docking bay, the low hum of his ship's engines ceased, and an eerie silence enveloped him. The stealth technology of his craft had worked, but now, in the belly of the enemy, he was truly on his own. The vast warship loomed around him like an impenetrable fortress, its dark corridors lined with gleaming metallic surfaces that reflected no light. The air was cool and sterile, with a faint humming sound that seemed to echo from every direction. Hayes quickly disembarked, his boots hitting the cold floor with a soft thud. He adjusted his helmet, ensuring the camouflaged visor was intact, and checked his weapon, a small, experimental plasma pistol, still secured at his side. His mission was clear: sabotage. But as he moved deeper into the ship, Hayes couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. It wasn't just the scale of the ship or the alien technology. It was the way everything seemed too quiet, too controlled. He moved with purpose, staying in the shadows as he navigated the corridors, keeping to the edges of the ship. His comm system, designed to intercept and jam the Zorvan signals, was working. There was no communication to alert the crew to his presence. But the deeper he went, the more unsettling it became. The Zorvans were everywhere, yet there was a strange sense of order, as if their entire existence was coordinated, methodical, and relentless. Then he stumbled upon something he hadn't expected. A chamber filled with screens and complex data readouts. It was a central control room, the beating heart of the warship's operations. But what caught his attention was not the advanced tech. It was the content displayed on the monitors, live footage of Earth. The Zorvans had been watching them. Every moment, every city, every movement. Hayes' pulse quickened as he realized the implications. The Zorvans had been studying Earth for far longer than anyone could have anticipated. This wasn't just an invasion. It was a calculated, cold operation to take Earth as a resource, an entire planet, ripe for the taking. The more he scrolled through the data, the clearer it became. The Zorvans were preparing to enslave humanity. They had developed a systematic plan to strip the planet of its resources, human labor, raw materials, and most shockingly, the planet's very energy. Earth was to become nothing more than a fuel source for the Zorvans' empire. But that wasn't the worst of it. Hayes found a secondary, hidden file, a weapons protocol, one that detailed the deployment of a planet-killing device, a massive destructive weapon capable of wiping out all life on Earth in a single strike. The weapon was already in the final stages of activation, set to launch as soon as the Zorvan fleet had full control. Hayes froze, the weight of the discovery crashing over him. The weapon wasn't just a threat. It was a guarantee. Earth had a matter of days, maybe hours, before the Zorvans wiped it from existence. As the reality of the situation hit him, Hayes knew what he had to do. The mission had just become far more complicated. He wasn't just here to sabotage the fleet. He had to destroy the weapon, or humanity was doomed. But he was alone, deep inside enemy territory, with no backup. He was staring down the end of Earth, and the only person standing in the way of annihilation was a single soldier. With grim determination, Hayes moved quickly. He needed to find the weapon, disable it, and get out. Every second counted. The Zorvans had just sealed Earth's fate, but Hayes wasn't ready to let that happen. Not while he was still breathing. Hayes moved through the shadowy corridors of the Zorvan warship, every step calculated, every breath shallow. The weight of what he had just discovered, the weapon capable of wiping out Earth, pulled heavily on his shoulders. But there was no time for hesitation. The clock was ticking. The planet killer was primed, and the Zorvans had no intention of waiting. As he neared the weapons chamber, the layout of the ship seemed more complex than ever. The alien architecture, though advanced, was efficient, designed for war, not for human understanding. Hayes was relying on instinct more than anything else now, guided only by the intel he had gathered and the small map he'd stolen from the Zorvan systems. The stakes had never been higher. One wrong turn, one mistake, and this would be the last mission he ever undertook. He reached the door to the weapons chamber. It was enormous, built to house the destructive force that would end Earth in a single blow. Hayes hesitated for a fraction of a second, listening for any sound, any indication of movement beyond the door. The silence was suffocating, but it was also his ally. He opened the door slowly, the cold steel groaning as it moved. Inside, the weapon was even more terrifying than he had imagined. A massive, pulsating energy core sat in the center of the chamber, surrounded by intricate machinery, glowing brightly in the dim lighting. It hummed with an unnatural power. The weapon was far beyond anything humanity had ever encountered. There were no signs of the Zorvans' high command. No guards, no soldiers. It was as though they had left him an opportunity. But that opportunity didn't last long. Just as Hayes was about to approach the core, an alarm blared throughout the ship. His heart raced as the lights shifted from dim to blinding red. The Zorvans had detected the intrusion. The ground beneath him trembled, and in an instant, the doors to the chamber slammed shut behind him, locking into place with a metallic clang. He spun around, adrenaline surging through his veins. The Zorvans had activated their defensive measures. Hayes had no time to analyze the situation. He had to act fast. From the dark corners of the room, shadowy figures emerge. Zorvan soldiers, clad in sleek, reflective armor, armed with energy rifles that glowed with an ominous light. They weren't the hulking, brute force warriors he had fought earlier. These were elite soldiers, trained for quick, precise combat. They moved with terrifying coordination, surrounding him with expert precision. Hayes' breath caught. This wasn't going to be easy. Without thinking, he dropped into a combat stance, drawing his plasma pistol. He fired a quick shot at the nearest soldier, the beam striking its shield with a sharp crack. The soldier reeled back, but the shield absorbed most of the blast, and it was already preparing to retaliate. Hayes dove behind a nearby control console for cover, the plasma blasts from the Zorvans' rifles scorching the air around him. The fight was on. Hayes knew he had to keep moving, had to stay unpredictable. He couldn't let them corner him. The soldiers were relentless, methodical in their approach, slowly closing in on his position. Each shot he fired seemed to have little effect. His weapon was simply no match for their energy shields. Then, in a flash of inspiration, he spotted something, a nearby control panel, connected directly to the weapon's energy core. If he could overload it, perhaps he could destabilize the weapon enough to cause a chain reaction. It wasn't a guarantee, but it was his only chance. With a grim sense of determination, Hayes sprinted toward the panel, dodging fire as he went. He reached it just as the soldiers closed in. Using the plasma pistol, he cut through the control system, sparks flying as he initiated an override. The core of the weapon began to flicker, its pulsating glow turning erratic. The Zorvan soldiers shouted in alarm as they realized what he was doing. The air in the room grew thick with tension. Hayes knew he didn't have much time before the weapon would go critical. He turned and bolted for the exit, narrowly avoiding a blast that would have obliterated him on the spot. The Zorvans were in full pursuit now, but Hayes had one last card to play. The ship groaned as it began to shake violently, the overload starting to destabilize the entire system. Hayes dove into a side corridor, his heart pounding as the walls trembled. The Zorvans were close, too close. But he wasn't going down without a fight. With every ounce of his strength, he pushed forward, heading for the heart of the ship where he could cause the ultimate disruption. This battle was far from over. But Hayes wasn't backing down. Not now. Not ever. The ship trembled beneath Hayes' feet as he sprinted down the dimly lit corridors. The overload he had initiated on the weapon was taking effect, but the countdown had already begun. The Zorvan warship was in the throes of a catastrophic meltdown, and every second that ticked by brought the ship and Earth closer to oblivion. Hayes' breath came in ragged gasps as he navigated the maze-like interior of the warship, his mind racing with calculations. The Zorvans' pursuit was relentless. He could hear their footsteps echoing in the distance, the pounding of their boots growing louder with each passing moment. They were closing in. He had no choice but to keep moving. The control systems for the ship were starting to flicker as the destabilization spread. Sparks erupted from panels along the walls, and the lights in the hallway flickered, casting eerie shadows that seemed to move with a life of their own. The whole ship felt like it was on the brink of collapse. Hayes could almost feel the Zorvan sense of urgency, their frustration growing as they realized the scale of the damage he had caused. He reached an intersection in the corridor, stopping just long enough to recalibrate his plans. If he didn't get off the ship in the next few minutes, the explosion would be catastrophic, not just for the Zorvans, but for Earth itself. The weapon's meltdown would send a shockwave throughout the fleet, potentially wiping out the entire Armada. If he didn't act fast, he wouldn't make it out in time to warn humanity. His eyes scanned the corridor, desperate for a way out. There, an emergency escape pod door, just ahead, flickering in the dim light. Hayes didn't hesitate. His hand shot out to press the button, and the door slid open with a hiss. Before he could step inside, a sudden explosion rattled the entire ship. The ground lurched violently beneath him, sending him crashing into the wall. His head spun as a ringing filled his ears, but he had no time to recover. The Zorvans were closing in. Hayes scrambled to his feet, ignoring the dizziness and the pounding pain in his skull. His only chance now was to reach the escape pod and hope it still functioned after the chaos he had caused. He dove inside the pod, sealing the hatch behind him just as another blast rocked the ship. The pod systems flickered to life, the emergency override kicking in. It was a primitive design, a last-ditch escape vehicle, and it was the only option Hayes had left. The pod shot forward, its engines roaring to life as it detached from the warship. For a moment, there was silence. Hayes let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. He had made it, but he couldn't relax yet. The Zorvan fleet was still out there, and the destruction he had caused would no doubt draw their attention. Through the small viewport, Hayes watched as the Zorvan warship began to collapse. Explosions erupted from the heart of the ship, sending debris spiraling into space. The light from the destruction illuminated the surrounding ships as shockwaves rippled through the Armada. Hayes could see the devastation spreading, like a chain reaction across the fleet. But his victory was bittersweet. The Zorvans had been dealt a massive blow, but Hayes knew that this was only the beginning. They would retaliate. The Armada wasn't just going to retreat. They would come back stronger, angrier. The destruction of their flagship was a major setback, but it would only fuel their determination to crush humanity. He couldn't afford to rest now. The escape pod systems indicated that he was on a trajectory to Earth, but it would take several days to make the journey. He had time, but not much. Hayes opened the comm channel, dialing into the Earth's emergency frequency. "This is Captain Alex Hayes. The Zorvan fleet has been severely damaged. The weapon is disabled, but they're not finished. Prepare for further conflict. I need extraction. Immediate." The radio crackled with static as the transmission reached Earth, but there was no reply. Hayes stared at the display, a sickening feeling in his stomach. The damage he had caused was massive, but humanity was still vulnerable. The Zorvans wouldn't stop until they had wiped out every last human. As the escape pod drifted toward Earth, Hayes' thoughts were consumed by the future. Earth was safe, for now. But the war was far from over. The escape pod rattled through space, its engines humming as it pushed toward Earth. Outside the small viewport, the wreckage of the Zorvan warship glowed, pieces of it tumbling through space like shattered debris from an impossible nightmare. The light from the explosion still lingered in Hayes' eyes, but even that brilliance couldn't distract him from the thoughts swirling in his mind. He had done it. He had crippled their weapon. He had taken down their flagship. The Zorvans had suffered a blow they couldn't ignore, but Hayes knew that wasn't enough. The fleet was still vast. The invasion hadn't been stopped. It had only been delayed. As the pod continued its lonely journey toward Earth, Hayes' thoughts turned to the survivors, those who had managed to escape, the government scrambling to regroup. The world was shattered, but it wasn't finished. Not yet. But the Zorvans would not go quietly into the void. The death of their warship, while a massive blow, would only fuel their rage. Humanity had made a powerful enemy, and no matter how many victories they gained, it wouldn't be enough. The Zorvans were methodical, intelligent, and relentless. The Zorvans would come back. Hayes knew it. Earth would not have long to prepare. He tapped the comm system again, hoping for a signal, but only static greeted him. His fingers hovered over the console, his mind running through contingency plans. A part of him, deep down, didn't want to admit the truth. Even with his actions, there was no guarantee Earth would survive this war. They had one chance, and it was slipping away. The pod systems flashed an alert. Incoming communication. Hayes' pulse quickened. It was Earth, or at least, it should be. He opened the comm channel. "Captain Hayes." The voice on the other end crackled. It was a woman's voice, sharp, professional, with a tone of authority. "This is Commander Ilara Lawson of the United Earth Command. We've received your transmission. We have a limited window of opportunity to act." Hayes exhaled with a mixture of relief and exhaustion. "Commander, we don't have much time. The Zorvans are coming back. We've crippled their fleet, but they'll rebuild, and they'll come with everything they've got." "We know." Lawson's voice was calm but urgent. "And we've been preparing. Your actions have bought us time, but it's only temporary. We're gathering what remains of Earth's military forces and civilian defenses. We need to rally. Fast." Hayes leaned back in his seat, trying to steady his thoughts. "What's the plan?" Lawson's voice became more focused. "We're mobilizing a global defense initiative. We've got new tech, some of it inspired by the data you've collected from the Zorvans. It's experimental, and we're still finalizing it, but we believe it can turn the tide. We're looking at a final confrontation, an all-out assault on the Zorvan fleet." A faint, grim smile tugged at Hayes' lips. "You want me to lead it?" "Exactly," Lawson replied. "Your experience with the Zorvans gives us a unique advantage. We need you on the front lines, Captain. We can't afford to fail now." Hayes paused for a long moment. His body was battered and bruised, his mind weary from the struggle. But this was what they had been waiting for. This was humanity's last stand. "Understood," Hayes finally said, his voice steady with resolve. "I'll be there. What do we need to do?" "We'll coordinate with your pod's arrival. Once you land, you'll be briefed on the new technology. We've already mobilized our forces to key locations around the globe. We're planning an assault on the remaining strongholds." Hayes felt the weight of the words settle on him. This was it. They had one shot. The Zorvans wouldn't hold back, and neither could humanity. Earth's survival depended on their collective resolve. The escape pod began to decelerate as it neared Earth's atmosphere, the blue planet growing larger in the viewport. Hayes gripped the armrests, a sense of finality pressing against his chest. He was heading back, not as a survivor, but as the last chance for humanity. Outside, Earth waited, teetering on the edge of destruction. Hayes' mission was far from over. The battle for Earth's future was just beginning. The escape pod entered Earth's atmosphere with a rush of heat and pressure. Hayes' body was pressed back into his seat, the force of re-entry causing his vision to blur for a moment. He gritted his teeth, focusing on the mission. He wasn't going to fail now. He couldn't. Earth was depending on him. As the pod broke through the clouds and into the clear sky, the Earth below was a sight both beautiful and haunting. The scars of the war were evident: burned cities, wrecked military installations, and the growing shadow of the Zorvan presence hanging over the planet. But there was still hope. Humanity had rallied, and their preparations were in motion. The final fight was about to begin. Hayes' pod touched down with a thud, the landing gear absorbing the shock as it settled onto the cracked Earth. The hatch opened with a hiss, revealing the makeshift base that had been set up just outside a devastated city. A team of soldiers rushed forward to assist him, their faces grim but resolute. They'd all seen the horrors the Zorvans could bring. They knew the stakes. Captain Hayes, one of the soldiers, a young officer, saluted. "We've been expecting you. Commander Lawson is waiting for you inside." Hayes gave a curt nod and followed them into the command tent. Inside, the atmosphere was tense, filled with the hum of communication devices and the sound of people moving with purpose. A large map of Earth was projected on the wall, marked with key Zorvan strongholds, military installations, and areas of resistance. Commander Lawson stood at the center, her back to the map, her eyes focused on the data. When she saw Hayes enter, she straightened, her expression hardening. "Captain," she said, her voice a mixture of respect and urgency, "you're back. We've been preparing for this." "I'm ready," Hayes replied, his voice steady, but the weight of what was coming settled heavily on his shoulders. He didn't have the luxury of doubt. He couldn't afford hesitation. Lawson gestured to the map. "We've pinpointed the last remnants of the Zorvan fleet. Their command ship is anchored just outside the planet's atmosphere. We've also identified key resource points they've been using to fuel their invasion. These must be neutralized, or they'll simply rebuild." "We don't have much time," Hayes said, scanning the map. "Their reinforcements could arrive at any moment. What's the plan?" Lawson stepped forward, tapping a spot on the map near the equator. "We've developed a weapon, a pulse satellite designed to disrupt Zorvan energy shields. It won't destroy their fleet, but it will leave them vulnerable for a short time. It's a risky move, and we'll only get one shot at it." Hayes nodded. He could feel the gravity of the situation pressing on him. "And the rest of the forces?" Lawson looked at him, her eyes narrowing. "We'll strike on multiple fronts, coordinated attacks from land, air, and space. The goal is to keep them distracted long enough for the pulse to hit. Once it does, we hit them with everything we've got." Hayes exhaled slowly. It wasn't much, but it was a plan, a chance, and right now, that was all they had. He turned to the officers around the room. "Prepare the forces. Get everyone ready. We move out as soon as the pulse satellite is in position." The room erupted into activity as soldiers, engineers, and strategists rushed to carry out the plan. Hayes couldn't shake the weight of what was coming. The Zorvans wouldn't go down easily, but humanity had learned the hard way that it wasn't just about power, it was about will. As Hayes walked toward the makeshift command center, he couldn't help but reflect on the long road that had led him here. From the moment the Zorvans had set their sights on Earth, He had been thrust into a war he never asked for. Yet, here he was, standing as humanity's last line of defense. It was more than just duty now. It was survival. The final assault would begin soon. Hayes didn't know if they could win, but he knew one thing. Earth would fight. Humanity would fight. And for the first time since this war had begun, Hayes felt a spark of hope deep within him. This wasn't over. It was only just beginning.